My small kitchen greeted me with cozy silence. I flipped the switch on the old coffee maker and walked over to the window. Miramar was still asleep, with only a few lights flickering in the pre-dawn gloom. My house was in the old part of town, far from tourist routes and trendy neighborhoods. Robert, my late husband, and I had lived here for almost 40 years. Our children, Josh and Brooke, had grown up here. My phone vibrated on the kitchen table. A message from Josh. Don't forget to bring the boxes with the decorations for the hall, and try to be there by 9, not 10 as we agreed. We need to get everything hung up. No good morning, or how did you sleep, Mom? Just an order, as if I were his personal assistant, not his mother. I sighed as I took a sip of coffee. My son had always been goal-oriented, but in recent years that trait had turned into an obsession with efficiency. He now divided people into useful and useless, and I'm afraid he increasingly considered his 65-year-old mother to be in the latter category. Boxes of wedding decorations took up almost my entire garage. Josh insisted that everything be delivered to me because he had too little space in his condo. For 3 weeks, I stumbled over these cardboard monsters, reminding myself that it would all be over soon. By 8:30, I had loaded my old Ford with boxes and headed for the Seaside Pavilion, a trendy oceanfront venue for celebrations. The drive took almost 40 minutes. Driving through the new neighborhoods of Miramar, I noticed how much the city had changed in recent years. It used to be a quiet coastal town where everyone knew each other. Now there were glass skyscrapers, expensive restaurants, and boutiques. Josh was waiting for me at the entrance to the pavilion, glancing impatiently at his watch. Tall, fit, and impeccably dressed, he always looked like he had just stepped off the cover of a business magazine. Finally, he said, instead of greeting me as I parked. What took you so long? Good morning, Josh. I smiled, getting out of the car. I'm even a little earlier than you asked. He looked at his watch, as if checking my words. Okay, let's unload. The decorators are waiting. I opened the trunk and Josh started pulling out boxes, passing them to his assistants who had arrived. Looking at my son, I couldn't help but remember how 20 years ago, as an 18-year-old boy, he came to me with shining eyes and told me about his dream of starting his own business. At the time, Robert and I had just paid off the mortgage on our house. Robert worked as an engineer at a local factory, and I was a nurse at the city hospital. We lived modestly but had plans for a peaceful retirement. But how could we say no to our son? Robert withdrew some of our savings, and I took on extra shifts. Josh started with a small construction supply company. I remember helping him with the books in the evenings after my shifts at the hospital, and Robert and I delivering orders in our old pickup truck. Mom, are you listening? Josh's voice brought me back to the present. Sorry, honey, I was lost in thought, I smiled guiltily. I'm saying you need to go to the hall and make sure the flowers are arranged exactly the way Audrey wants. Here's the plan. He handed me a tablet with a diagram on it. Of course, but isn't that the wedding planner's job? Josh sighed irritably. Mom, we discussed this. Miss Harper is in charge of overall coordination. She has too many tasks to keep track of every little detail. That's why I divided up the responsibilities. You're in charge of the flowers and table decorations. I nodded, suppressing a sigh. Of course we had discussed it. More accurately, Josh had presented me with a fait accompli 2 days ago, announcing that I would be assisting the wedding planner. His reasoning was that you're retired and have plenty of free time. He somehow forgot to mention that I babysit his daughters, Mabel and Penny, 3 times a week while his ex-wife Carla is at work. Inside, the pavilion was spacious and bright. Huge, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the ocean. A team of decorators was already hard at work hanging garlands and draperies. You must be Mrs. Trist? A young woman with a tablet approached me. I'm Violet, Miss Harper's assistant. Josh said you'd be supervising the flower arrangements. Yes, that's right, I smiled. Show me where they should go according to the plan. For the next 2 hours, I arranged vases of flowers, checking the diagram and trying to please my son's bride, who was still invisible. Peonies, roses, hydrangeas, all in pale pink and cream tones. Beautiful but impersonal, like the interior of an expensive hotel. I used to dream that Josh's wedding would be in our garden. Robert and I had bought a house with a large plot of land, imagining how our children would play there and then, perhaps get married there themselves. Robert even built a gazebo covered with vines, but Josh thought it was provincial. Eleanor! A ringing voice interrupted my thoughts. Josh's bride, Audrey Paxton, entered the room accompanied by two bridesmaids. She was tall and slender, with perfectly styled blonde hair and flawless makeup. "Good morning, Audrey," I said, trying to hug my future daughter-in-law, but she deftly turned it into an air kiss, barely touching my cheek. "How are the flowers coming along?" She glanced around the room. "Oh, I see you're almost done. But I think the arrangements on the main table are too tall. The guests won't be able to see each other over them." "But that's the height on the diagram." "Yes, but now I think they should be lower." She smiled that special smile that said, "I'm polite, but I'm firm. I think we need to remove the top tier of flowers." I nodded, suppressing a sigh. That meant dismantling and reassembling 12 complicated arrangements that I had been working on for the last 2 hours. "Of course, Audrey. Whatever you say." "Great!" She clapped her hands. "And also, we've decided to change the table layout a little. Jade will show you the new layout." She nodded to one of her friends, who immediately handed me another tablet. I glanced at the screen and froze. The layout had been completely redrawn. "But the tables are already set up according to the original plan." "Yes, we'll have to move them," Audrey replied casually. "I consulted with a feng shui consultant yesterday, and he said that the previous arrangement was blocking the flow of energy." I glanced at my watch. It was almost noon, and we were essentially starting all over again. "Does Josh know about these changes?" "Of course, he's totally supportive," Audrey said, taking out her phone. "Here, look at his message. Do whatever you think is best, dear." It was so typical of Josh in recent years, passing decisions on to others and then demanding perfection. I went back to the flower arrangements and started taking them apart. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Audrey and her friends sitting at a table in the back with glasses of champagne, discussing some details and giggling from time to time. I met Audrey 2 years ago when Josh brought her to Christmas dinner. She worked at a marketing agency that promoted Josh's company. The romance began while we were working together on a rebranding project. Audrey was smart, ambitious, and importantly for Josh, she knew her way around the business. My relationship with my future daughter-in-law was rocky from the start. She smiled politely and asked all the right questions, but I could sense her condescension. This became especially apparent when she found out that I had worked as a nurse my entire life. "How interesting," she said at the time. "Everyone in my family has at least a master's degree. My father is a professor of economics, and my mother is a lawyer." She didn't say it with obvious contempt, but the message was clear. I wasn't one of them. Josh didn't say anything, although he could have reminded her that it was his parents, with their inadequate education, who had given him a start in life. "Eleanor, can I talk to you for a minute?" Audrey came over to me as I was finishing the last song. "We've been thinking about the seating arrangements. I know it was originally planned for you to sit at the head table, but there's been a slight problem with the number of seats." I froze, unable to believe my ears. Were they really going to move me, the groom's mother, to another table? "You see," Audrey continued, "Josh's parents are supposed to sit at the head table, but since," she faltered, searching for the right words, "since Mr. Trist is no longer with us, we thought we'd invite my Uncle Frank. He's a very important man in our family, and my parents insist." "You mean I won't be at the head table at my own son's wedding?" I tried to sound calm, but I could feel my voice shaking. No, of course not." Audrey laughed nervously. "We just thought you'd be more comfortable sitting with Rose, your friend." We invited her, and she confirmed she'd be there. "You won't know most of the guests at the head table." That was too much. I put down the flowers and stood up straight. "Audrey, I understand that this is your and Josh's wedding, and you have the right to decide how everything is organized. But I'm Josh's mother, and traditionally the parents of the bride and groom sit at the head table, regardless of whether they know the other guests or not." Audrey's face tensed slightly, but her smile remained. "Of course, Eleanor, I understand how you feel. Let's discuss it with Josh when he's free." "That's a great idea," I nodded. "Where is he now?" "He went to meet my parents at the airport." She glanced at her watch. "He should be back in an hour and a half." I went back to work trying to calm down. Memories swirled in my head of how Robert and I had supported Josh all these years. How, after Robert died 5 years ago, I had invested the rest of our savings in expanding my son's business by buying shares in his company. How I sat with my granddaughters when his first marriage fell apart, and Carla threatened to restrict his parental rights if he didn't spend more time with the children. Josh returned around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, accompanied by the Paxtons, a tall, elegant couple with impeccable manners. Mr. Paxton, a gray-haired man with an imposing bearing, immediately gave the impression of a man accustomed to power. Mrs. Paxton, a slender woman with the same cold gaze as her daughter, gave me a searching look, lingering on my simple dress and worn-out shoes. "Mom, meet Margaret and Richard Paxton, Audrey's parents." Josh introduced them with such pride, as if he had received a royal blessing. "Very nice to meet you," I said, extending my hand. "Eleanor Trist." "Likewise," Margaret replied dryly, barely touching my hand. "Josh has told us a lot about you," Richard added with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope it was something good," I joked, but no one smiled. "Mom is helping us with the arrangements," Josh hastened to explain. "She's in charge of the flowers and some other details." "How sweet," Margaret said. "In our family, we usually hire professionals for things like that, but I suppose there's something touching about getting personally involved." I felt myself blushing with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. It was as if I wasn't the groom's mother, but some hired helper who was being condescendingly praised. "Josh, can I talk to you for a minute?" I decided not to put off the seating arrangement discussion. "Mom, I'm a little busy." He glanced quickly at his watch. "Maybe later?" "It's important and will only take a couple of minutes." Josh apologized to the Paxtons and stepped aside with me. "What's the matter?" he asked impatiently. "Audrey said I won't be at the head table." I tried to sound calm but firm. "Is that true?" Josh ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I had known since he was a child. He always did that when he felt uncomfortable. "Listen, Mom, we really don't have enough seats. We thought you'd be more comfortable with Rose." "Josh, I'm your mother. I should be at the head table." "But Uncle Frank is very important to Audrey's family, and her parents insist." "And I'm not important to your family?" My voice faltered. Josh looked around, as if afraid someone would overhear our conversation. "Of course you are. It's just, you have to understand, this wedding is a big deal, not just for Audrey and me, but for the business. A lot of important people will be there, and we need to make the right impression." "And I don't fit into that right impression?" I couldn't hide my bitterness anymore. "Mom, don't be dramatic." He lowered his voice. "It's not about you personally, it's about how things have to look. Uncle Frank is an influential investor, and if he agrees to work with us..." "So it's a business decision?" I smiled bitterly. "You're pushing your mother aside for a potential deal?" "Don't say that," Josh frowned. "It's just seating at a table. Don't make a tragedy out of it." I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. It hurt to realize that I had become an obstacle to my son, an inconvenient reminder of his humble origins. "Fine, Josh, I'll sit wherever you think is best. After all, it's your wedding." He smiled with relief, not noticing, or not wanting to notice, the pain in my eyes. "Thanks for understanding, Mom. Now excuse me, I have to get back to the Paxtons." I watched my son return to his future in-laws, instantly transforming himself, straightening his shoulders, putting on his most charming smile. A successful businessman for whom his own mother had become a burden. The day dragged on endlessly. I continued working on the decorations, periodically receiving new instructions from Audrey or the wedding planner. By evening, my back ached and my legs were buzzing with fatigue. When the last arrangement was in place, I sank with relief into a chair in the far corner of the hall. "Hard day?" Violet, the planner's assistant, sat down next to me. "That's an understatement," I smiled weakly. "You know, I've been to a lot of weddings," she said quietly, "and I often notice how the groom's mothers are treated. It's as if they become invisible." I nodded gratefully, touched by her sympathy. "I guess it's part of the cycle of life," I said philosophically. "Children grow up and move away. It's just that sometimes it happens too suddenly." Violet was about to reply when Josh approached us. Mom, are you still here? It's almost 8 o'clock. Yes, I just finished with the flowers, I said, struggling to stand up, my legs feeling weak. Great, he nodded. Listen, we need to get there early tomorrow. Carla is bringing the girls here at 11, and someone needs to watch them until the ceremony. They'll be scattering petals, remember? Of course, I nodded. My granddaughters Mabel and Penny were going to be flower girls at the wedding. And another thing, Josh lowered his voice. Bring your blue dress, the one you showed me last time. Miss Harper said one of the assistants is sick, and we might need an extra pair of hands in the kitchen. I froze, not believing my ears. You want me to work in the kitchen? At your wedding? Only if you have to, he added quickly. Just be ready to help if needed. It's no big deal, right? I looked at my son, trying to see the boy I had once taught kindness and respect for others. The teenager who brought me tea when I was sick. The young man who cried on his mother's shoulder when his father died. But standing before me was a stranger, someone I had become nothing more than a tool for, convenient when help was needed and inconvenient when prestige was at stake. No, Josh, I smiled wearily. No problem. I'll bring the blue dress. The morning of the wedding day was clear and windless. The sun's rays shining through the blinds woke me up before my alarm clock. I lay there for a few minutes staring at the ceiling and mentally preparing for the day ahead. Yesterday's conversation with Josh was still on my mind. I still couldn't believe that my son had asked me to be ready to work in the kitchen on his own wedding day. Pull yourself together, Eleanor, I said aloud. Today is an important day, and you're not going to ruin it with your resentment. I took a shower, dried and styled my hair carefully, and applied makeup. A little more than usual, but still subtle. I put on the dark turquoise dress I had bought especially for my son's wedding. Then, I took the blue dress Josh had mentioned out of the closet, a simple dress with a white collar, more like a uniform. I folded it neatly into my bag, trying not to think about why I might need it. It was 9 in the morning when I left the house. It was about a 40-minute drive to the seaside pavilion. On the way, I stopped at a cafe and bought a coffee, a little indulgence I allowed myself on special days. A sip of hot latte helped me calm down a little and get in a positive mood. After all, I thought, today is my only son's wedding day. I should be happy for him no matter what happens. As I approached the pavilion, I saw that the parking lot was almost full. People in uniforms were bustling about at the entrance, the staff catering for the event. For a moment, I was overcome by a strange feeling. It was as if I wasn't the groom's mother, but just another hired hand. Good morning, Mrs. Trist, Violet greeted me as I entered the building. Josh asked me to tell you he's in the groom's room on the second floor. The girls aren't here yet. Thank you, Violet, I smiled at her. How are the preparations going? Everything is according to plan, she checked her tablet. The ceremony will begin at 2 o'clock and the guests will start arriving at 1. Oh, and one more thing. Miss Harper asked me to remind you that after the ceremony, the chairs need to be rearranged quickly for the reception while the guests are at the cocktail reception. I nodded, noting to myself that even on my son's wedding day, I was being assigned organizational tasks, but I decided not to dwell on it. I'll go up to Josh, I said, heading for the stairs. The groom's room was a spacious, bright room with an ocean view. Josh was standing by the window, talking on the phone. Next to him, 2 men, his friends Nate and Larry, were fiddling with boutonnieres. Hi, Mom, Josh nodded briefly, continuing his conversation. I quietly greeted Nate and Larry and sat down on the sofa, waiting for my son to finish. Listening to snippets of his business conversation, even on his own wedding day, I remembered how I had once prepared Josh for his first school prom. How nervous he was, how I fixed his tie and assured him that everything would be fine. Back then, he looked at me with such trust and gratitude. Sorry, Mom, urgent call. Josh finally finished his conversation and came over to me. Thanks for coming early. Carla will bring the girls soon. You look good. It was probably the warmest comment he had made in months. Thank you, dear. You look great, too. I stood up and wanted to hug him, but Josh pulled away slightly, pointing to his perfectly ironed suit. Don't wrinkle it, Mom. The photographer will be here soon. I lowered my arms, feeling a pang of disappointment. Of course. Are you worried? Worried? Josh smiled. Why would I be? Everything is going according to plan. It's normal to be nervous on your wedding day, I said gently. It's just another important day. Josh shrugged. Everything is planned down to the last detail. There won't be any surprises. I looked at my son, trying to see even a glimmer of excitement or joy in his eyes. But there was only the composed calm of a man in control. There was a knock at the door, and Carla entered with Mabel and Penny. My granddaughters, dressed in matching cream dresses, rushed toward me with joyful cries. Grandma! I sat down, opening my arms, and the girls threw their arms around my neck, showering me with the scent of children's shampoo and caramel candies. My beautiful girls! I kissed each of them on the cheek. How pretty you look today! Daddy said we're going to throw flowers, announced 7-year-old Mabel proudly. And everyone will look at us, added 5-year-old Penny. Of course they will, I smiled. You're the prettiest flower girls in the world. Carla, a slender brunette in a strict dark blue dress, nodded to me discreetly. Our relationship had remained polite and distant since her divorce from Josh, although she always allowed me to see her granddaughters. Eleanor, she held out her hand to me. You look well. Thank you, Carla. You too, I shook her hand. Josh barely glanced at his ex-wife, focusing all his attention on his daughters. Girls, remember what we talked about? He crouched down in front of them. No running, no stains on your dresses. You must behave like proper young ladies. Yes, Daddy, the girls replied in unison, instantly becoming serious. I'll leave them with you, Mom. Josh straightened up. Make sure they don't get dirty before the ceremony. Carla, will you stay? No, she shook her head. I'll be back for the ceremony. I have some things to do in town. After Carla left, I took the girls to a small lounge where light snacks and juice had been prepared for them. We spent the next 2 hours talking, reading books I had thoughtfully brought with me, and periodically stepping out into the hallway to stretch our legs. I tried to keep my granddaughters away from the main rooms where preparations were in full swing, so they wouldn't get their dresses dirty. At 12:30, Violet peeked into the room. Mrs. Trist, the guests are starting to arrive. Miss Harper asked me to tell you that you need to go down to the main hall to meet them. Of course, I nodded. What about the girls? They're being taken to the wedding venue just before the ceremony begins. Don't worry, the assistant coordinator will be with them. I kissed my granddaughters and promised I would see them soon at the ceremony. Then I went down to the main hall, where the first guests were already gathering. I was met by Miss Harper, a stern middle-aged woman with a clipboard in her hands. Ah, Mrs. Trist, there you are. Please stand here and greet the guests from the groom's side. Direct them to the seating chart, she said, pointing to a large stand with the guest names on it. Pay special attention to Mr. and Mrs. Woodward. They are important business partners of Josh's. I took the designated place, feeling strange. Usually, the mother of the groom does not work as a hostess at her own son's wedding. But I decided that this might be a new tradition that I wasn't aware of. The guests arrived one after another. Most of them I was seeing for the first time. Josh's business associates, Audrey's friends, people from their mutual circle. Only a few were familiar to me. My friend Rose, a couple of old friends of our family, distant relatives. Eleanor, dear. Rose, an energetic woman my age with short gray hair, hugged me tightly. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I smiled, happy to see a familiar face. Thank you for coming. Of course I came, although I must say it's strange to see you here as the hostess instead of the groom's mother of honor. I'm just helping out, I shrugged, not wanting to discuss the subject. Rose gave me a searching look but said nothing. She knew me too well and could see the pain behind my smile. By 2 o'clock, all the guests had gathered in the open area where the ceremony was to take place. Chairs decorated with ribbons and flowers stood in rows in front of an arch covered with roses and hydrangeas. The ocean sparkled in the distance, creating the perfect backdrop for wedding photos. I took my place in the front row, as befits the mother of the groom. At least Josh hadn't changed that tradition. Audrey's parents sat next to me, barely acknowledging me with a nod. On the other side of the aisle were the guests of honor, mostly Josh's business partners and Audrey's relatives. The ceremony began at 2 o'clock sharp. First, Josh appeared, accompanied by Nate, his best man. They stood under the arch, waiting for the bride. Then came the bridesmaids, dressed in matching pale pink dresses. Behind them, scattering rose petals from small baskets, were my granddaughters, serious and focused as never before. When the wedding music began, everyone stood up. Audrey appeared on her father's arm. She was beautiful in an exquisite dress by a famous designer, with a veil flowing behind her like a light cloud. I saw Josh's face soften at the sight of his bride and felt a surge of tenderness toward my son. No matter how our relationship turned out, I sincerely wished him happiness. The ceremony was short and elegant. The bride and groom exchanged vows, which I noticed were very formal, without excessive sentimentality. When they exchanged rings and the officiant declared them husband and wife, the guests burst into applause. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the cocktail area while the staff rearranged the main banquet hall. I found my granddaughters, who, having fulfilled their role, could now relax a little. We sat in a quiet corner, and I listened to their enthusiastic stories about how they had been the best flower girls ever. About an hour later, Miss Harper announced that the banquet was ready, and the guests began to move into the main hall. I took the girls by the hand and led them to our table, not the main one, of course, but the one reserved for the groom's family, which was set aside from the center of the hall. The banquet hall looked magnificent. The flower arrangements I had worked on yesterday created the atmosphere of an elegant garden. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, silver cutlery. Everything sparkled in the afternoon sun streaming through the huge windows. We had just sat down when Miss Harper approached me with a tense expression on her face. "Mrs. Trist, we have a problem," she said quietly. "One of the waiters didn't show up and the other just reported that he's not feeling well. Josh said you were willing to help." I froze, unable to believe my ears. Was this really happening? "Now?" I asked, hoping I had misheard. "Yes, unfortunately the situation is critical. The banquet is about to begin, and we don't have enough people to serve the guests." I looked around, searching for Josh. He was standing at the head table talking to one of the guests. Feeling my gaze, he turned and nodded at me with an expression that clearly said, "You promised to help." "What about the girls?" I pointed to my granddaughters. "Carla is already here, she'll look after them," replied Miss Harper. As if on cue, Carla approached our table. She frowned when she saw my confused expression. "Is something wrong?" "Mrs. Tristy needs help in the kitchen," Miss Harper explained. "Would you mind taking care of the girls?" Carla raised her eyebrows in surprise but nodded. "Of course, no problem." I stood up, feeling my cheeks burn with shame and humiliation. "My blue dress is in my bag, in the groom's room," I told Miss Harper. "Oh, don't worry about that." She waved her hand. "We don't have time to change. Just throw an apron over your dress." That was the last straw. Not only did I have to work at my own son's wedding, but I had to do it in a dress I had chosen especially for the occasion, with an apron over it. "I'll be right back," I said to my granddaughters, trying to make my voice sound normal. Miss Harper led me to the kitchen, where organized chaos reigned. Cooks and assistants bustled about, preparing dishes for the first course. Waiters lined up to receive their final instructions. "Here you are." I was handed a white apron and given brief instructions on what to do. "You'll be serving tables 17 to 21. First, serve the salads, then the main course. Try to work quickly and discreetly." I tied the apron around myself with trembling hands. One thought pulsed through my head. How did it come to this? How did I, the groom's mother, end up in the kitchen as a waitress? But there was no time to think. I was handed a tray of salads and went out into the hall. The first table I was to serve was not far from the main one. As I approached, I felt the guests' eyes on me, surprised, sympathetic, and sometimes openly mocking. "Isn't that Josh's mother?" I heard someone whisper as I placed a plate in front of one of the guests. "Why is she working as a waitress?" "No idea," replied another voice. "Maybe they're having financial problems?" I tried not to listen, focusing on my task, plate after plate, table after table. My hands worked automatically, but my thoughts wandered far away. I remembered how, 20 years ago, Robert and I had invested almost all our savings in Josh's first business. How I sat with him late into the night helping him sort through the books and tax forms. How Robert and I took turns delivering orders to customers because Josh couldn't afford a courier service. I remembered how, after Robert died 5 years ago, Josh convinced me to invest the rest of our money in his company. "It'll be your retirement fund, Mom," he said. "The company is growing and the stock will only go up." I remembered the sleepless nights I spent with little Mabel and Penny when Josh and Carla's marriage was falling apart. How I had put aside my plans for the trip I had dreamed of all my life, so I could be there to help with the girls while their parents were going through a divorce. All of this flashed through my mind as I automatically set the plates in front of the guests, smiling a forced smile and trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Josh and Audrey at the head table. They were laughing, accepting congratulations, looking happy and carefree. Next to them sat Audrey's parents and an elderly man, apparently the same Uncle Frank who had been pushed aside to make room for me. I suddenly wanted to just leave, to drop everything and go home, crawl under the covers, and finally let myself cry. But I couldn't do that. Not today. Not at my son's wedding, no matter what he was like. After the salads, it was time for the main course. I went back to the kitchen for more trays. The head chef gave me a sympathetic look. "It's tough, isn't it?" he asked, handing me another tray. "It's been worse," I tried to smile, but my lips wouldn't obey me. "You know, I've been working here for 15 years, he said, lowering his voice. "And this is the first time I've seen a groom's mother working in the kitchen. It's unusual." "Yes," was all I could say. I continued working, trying not to make eye contact with people I knew personally, but it was impossible. Rose, my best friend, was sitting at one of the tables I was serving. When I approached her with a tray, she asked quietly, "Eleanor, what's going on? Why are you working at the banquet?" "We're short-staffed," I replied just as quietly. "Josh asked me to help." Anger flashed in Rose's eyes. "That's outrageous. You're the groom's mother." "Please don't make a scene," I said, looking imploringly at my friend. "Not today." Rose pursed her lips but nodded. The hardest part was walking past the table where my granddaughters were sitting with Carla. The girls looked at me with wide eyes, not understanding why their grandmother had suddenly become a waitress. "Grandma, why are you working?" Mabel asked as I placed a plate in front of her. "I'm just helping out, sweetie." I tried to smile as naturally as possible. "They're short-staffed and Dad asked me to fill in." "But you're a grandmother, not a waitress," Penny, who was wise beyond her years, pointed out. "Sometimes even grandmothers can be waitresses." I winked at her. "It's like a game." Carla looked at me with an unreadable expression on her face, but I thought I saw something like sympathy flash in her eyes. When the main course was served, there was a short break before dessert. I returned to the kitchen and sat down on a chair in the corner, my legs and back aching. 65 isn't the best age to be a waitress, especially without training. My thoughts returned to the past, to how Josh had changed over the years. When did this estrangement begin? When did my caring son turn into a man for whom status and appearances were more important than his own mother's feelings? Maybe it started with his first serious successes in business? Or after his divorce from Carla, when he started dating women from higher social circles? Or was it the influence of Audrey and her family, for whom social status was everything? I don't know. But somewhere along the way, I lost my son. The boy who brought me bouquets of wildflowers he picked on his way home from school. The teenager who fiercely defended me when a neighbor boy made a rude joke about me. The young man who swore he would always take care of his parents when he got on his feet. Now there was a stranger in his place. A successful businessman for whom I had become an inconvenient reminder of his humble origins. Suddenly, I thought of the shares in Josh's company that I had bought after Robert's death. I still had them, and as far as I knew, their value had risen significantly since then. Maybe it was time to think about what to do with them. The wedding ended around midnight. I left as soon as I had a chance to slip away unnoticed, right after the newlyweds cut the cake and opened the dance floor. No one noticed my absence, not even Josh, who was too busy accepting congratulations from important guests. The drive home was a blur. I drove slowly, automatically turning the wheel at familiar intersections, barely noticing the few cars and deserted streets of Miramar. The echoes of the wedding music still rang in my head, mixed with the whispers of the guests when they saw me with the tray and apron. After parking the car near the house, I just sat there in silence for a few minutes, unable to find the strength to get out. Finally, taking a deep breath, I forced myself to leave the car and head for the door. My house greeted me with its usual silence. I mechanically turned on the light in the hallway, took off my shoes, which had rubbed my feet raw, and went into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water but didn't drink it. I just put it on the table and sank into a chair. The dark turquoise dress I had so carefully chosen for my son's wedding now seemed foreign to me. I unzipped it and let it fall to my feet, leaving me in my underwear. Then I picked up the dress and carefully hung it on the back of a chair, an old habit of treating things with care. Although I doubt I'll ever wear it again, it now held too many humiliating memories. I stood under the hot shower in the bathroom for a long time, as if trying to wash away not only the physical exhaustion but also the moral humiliation of the day. The water ran down my body, mixing with the tears I finally allowed myself to shed. Wrapping myself in an old terry cloth robe, I went into the bedroom and lay down on the bed without turning on the nightlight. Moonlight streamed through the uncurtained window, casting strange patterns on the wall. I stared at them, trying to distract myself from my thoughts, but they stubbornly returned to the events of the day. I saw Josh's face as he looked at me from the head table. A fleeting glance that showed neither gratitude nor regret, only a businesslike confirmation that I was fulfilling my role. I saw the surprised and sympathetic looks of the guests as I placed plates in front of them. I heard whispers behind my back. "Is that Josh's mother? Why is she working as a waitress?" The clock on the bedside table showed 2 in the morning, but sleep would not come. I got up, threw on my robe, and went down to the kitchen. I made some tea and sat down at the table, looking out the window at the quiet street lit by a few streetlights. My thoughts returned to the day Josh came to me with a proposal to invest in his company. It was shortly after Robert's death. I was still in deep mourning, trying to get used to life without the man I had shared 40 years with. "Mom, I know this isn't the best time, but I want to talk to you about the future," Josh said, sitting across from me at that same kitchen table. "What future?" I asked, absent-mindedly stirring my tea. "Your financial future," he said, placing some papers in front of me. "I know you and Dad had savings, and I thought the best way to ensure you have a stable income is to invest it in my company." I remember how skeptical I looked at him then. Robert had always been against putting all our money in one place. "Never put all your eggs in one basket," he used to say. "I'm not sure, Josh," I replied. "Your father always believed in diversifying investments." "Dad was right for his time." Josh smiled with slight condescension. "But this is a different era. My company is growing steadily. We have new contracts and promising markets." "Just look at these charts," he said, pointing to the papers. I looked at the numbers and graphs, not understanding much. Josh patiently explained how the business worked, how the stock price was growing, and what dividends I could receive. "But most importantly, Mom," he added, "it's the security of your investment. You'll own part of the family business. It's not just money, it's Dad's legacy that we're continuing together." Robert's legacy? That hit me hard. Robert was so proud of his son, so happy with his success in business. Maybe this was the best way to honor his memory? "How much are you asking me to invest?" I asked at the time. Josh named a figure that amounted to almost 80% of Robert's and my savings. I hesitated, but my son was insistent. "Think about the future, Mom. Think about your old age, about not being dependent on anyone. These shares are your freedom and security." That day I agreed. I signed all the papers, transferred the money, and became the owner of a fairly large stake in Trist Construction Supply. At the time, it was a small but growing company that supplied building materials. Josh wasn't wrong about the company's growth. In 5 years, it had expanded significantly, opening new lines of business and increasing its customer base. The value of my shares had almost tripled. I received steady dividends that allowed me to live comfortably without worrying about money. But what good is financial independence when your own son treats you like an annoying nuisance? I got up from the table and walked over to the window. Miramar was beautiful at night, slumbering quietly. Somewhere out there, in an expensive hotel on the ocean front, my son and his new wife were spending their wedding night. Tomorrow they would fly off on their honeymoon, a 2-week tour of Europe, and I would stay here, in my quiet house, with my thoughts and memories and with his company's shares. Shares. The thought that had flashed through my mind during the wedding had now returned with renewed force. What if I sold them? Not just sell them, but sell them to Josh's competitor. Wesley Dern, owner of Dern Building Materials, was my son's main competitor in Miramar. Their companies fought for the same contracts and the same clients. Josh often mentioned Dern at home, always with irritation and hostility. "That old fox stole another client from us," he complained. "Dern is using his connections on the city council to block our bids," he fumed on another occasion. I had never met Wesley Dern in person, but from Josh's stories, I imagined him as a ruthless business shark, willing to destroy any competitor. But what if I offered him my shares? From what I understood from Josh's conversations with his business partners, which sometimes took place at my house, my stake was significant enough to interest a competitor. Not a controlling stake, of course, but a significant one. I returned to the table and opened my laptop. The old but reliable computer booted up slowly. I logged into my email, then opened the folder where I kept electronic copies of all my important documents. There they were, the stock documents. I studied them carefully, trying to figure out how much of the company I owned. According to the latest report Josh had sent me about 6 months ago, my shares amounted to 15% of the company. Not enough to influence strategic decisions, but enough to pique the interest of a competitor. I opened my browser and typed Dern Building Materials into the search bar. The company's website looked professional and modern. I found the About Us section and saw a photo of Wesley Dern, a man in his late 50s with graying dark hair and an attentive gaze. Wesley Dern founded the company in 1995, read the text below the photo. Since then, Dern Building Materials has become one of the leading suppliers of building materials in Miramar and the surrounding area. Our mission is to provide our customers with quality materials at a fair price, while maintaining the highest level of service. Nothing particularly remarkable, standard corporate text. But I was intrigued by the social responsibility section. It turned out that Dern's company was actively involved in charitable projects, sponsoring a local children's sports team and a city tree planting program. This didn't fit with the image of a ruthless predator that Josh had painted. However, I understood that charity could simply be part of a PR strategy. I found the company's contact information and wrote down the phone number and email address. Then I leaned back in my chair, thinking about my next move. Was I ready to take such a drastic step? Selling my son's company shares to his main competitor would be a real stab in the back. Josh would never forgive me. But hadn't he stabbed me in the back today? Hadn't he humiliated me in front of everyone by making me work as a waitress at his wedding? Hadn't he pushed me away from the main table as if I were a stranger? I remembered his cold stare, his condescending tone, his willingness to sacrifice my dignity to impress his business partners. I remembered how he introduced me to Audrey's parents, as if apologizing for my existence. No, I didn't want revenge. I just wanted him to understand that you can't treat people that way, especially those who have supported you your whole life. Perhaps losing a significant share of the company would be a lesson for him. Besides, I had every right to dispose of my shares as I saw fit. It was my money, my investment. Josh always emphasized that this was my financial independence. Well, it was time to take advantage of that independence. I opened a new email and began to type. Dear Mr. Dern, my name is Eleanor Trist, and I am the owner of 15% of the shares in Trist Construction Supply. I would like to discuss with you the possibility of selling these shares to your company. If you are interested in this offer, I would be happy to meet with you to discuss the details. Sincerely, Eleanor Trist. My finger hovered over the send button. It wasn't too late to change my mind. I could close the letter, turn off the computer, and go to bed. I could meet Josh after he returned from his honeymoon, try to talk to him, explain my feelings. Maybe he would understand, apologize. But deep down, I knew that wouldn't happen. Josh was too immersed in his world of ambition and status to sincerely consider my feelings. To him, I was a relic of the past, an inconvenient reminder of the modest origins he was trying so hard to forget. I clicked send. The letter was gone, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. What would happen next? Would Dern respond? Would he be interested in my offer? And how would Josh react when he found out? I closed my laptop and went back to my bedroom. It was almost 4 in the morning, but I still couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about how my life had changed in recent years. After Robert's death, I had gradually drifted away from many of my friends. It wasn't intentional, it just happened that way. Most of our mutual friends were married couples, and I felt like a third wheel when I was with them. Only my closest friends, like Rose, remained. My daughter Brooke lived in another city 6 hours away from Miramar. We talked on the phone once a week and saw each other a few times a year. She invited me to move in with her, but I refused. I didn't want to be a burden on her young family. Josh was the only close person I had left. Despite his growing aloofness, I clung to our relationship. Maybe too much. Maybe that's what led us to where we are today. But now something has changed. The humiliation at the wedding was the last straw. I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. I couldn't continue playing the role of the convenient mother who could be pushed aside when she didn't fit into the picture of a perfect life. The letter to Dern was the first step towards something new, towards freedom from illusions, towards accepting reality for what it is. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew that I would no longer silently accept my son's contempt. No longer would I sacrifice my dignity for his approval. With that thought, I finally fell into a restless sleep. I woke up late, around 11 o'clock. My head was heavy from lack of sleep, and my throat was dry. I struggled to get out of bed and stumbled into the bathroom. The cold water on my face refreshed me a little, but the fatigue and emotional exhaustion from yesterday were still taking their toll. In the kitchen, I automatically turned on the coffee maker and took some eggs out of the refrigerator for breakfast. The familiar movements helped me not to think about what had happened yesterday and what I had done during the night. Only when I sat down at the table with a cup of coffee and toast did I allow myself to turn on my phone. There were several congratulatory messages from friends who had not been at the wedding. A call from Brooke. I'd have to call her back later. And one new email from Wesley Dern. My heart leapt when I saw his name in my inbox. He had replied. And he had replied very quickly. The email had arrived at 7:30 in the morning. I opened the message, feeling my hands tremble. Dear Mrs. Trist, thank you for your message. I am interested in your proposal and would be happy to meet to discuss the details. I look forward to seeing you at my office today at 3 p.m., if that works for you. The address is 42 Primorsko Chaussee, Mayak Business Center, 8th floor. Sincerely, Wesley Dern. Today. He wants to meet today. It's all happening too fast. I took a sip of coffee, trying to collect my thoughts. Maybe I should postpone the meeting? Give myself time to think, weigh the pros and cons? Maybe in a few days, when my emotions had calmed down, I would realize that I didn't want to do it. But another part of me knew that procrastination would only increase my doubts. If I really wanted to do this, and after yesterday's humiliation I really did, then it was better to act decisively. I replied to the email, confirming the meeting. The Mayak Business Center towered over the other buildings in this part of Miramar, its glass panels glistening in the afternoon sun. I had never been here before. This part of town had been developed relatively recently, and I had never had any reason to come here. Josh sometimes held meetings at one of the local restaurants, but his office was located in a more traditional business district closer to the center. I parked my car in the underground parking lot and sat for a few minutes, gathering my thoughts. In the rearview mirror, I saw my reflection, a woman who was no longer young, with neatly styled gray hair and wearing the strict dark blue suit I had worn to all important meetings for the past 10 years. The suit was a little looser than it used to be. I had lost weight after Robert's death and never regained it. What are you doing, Eleanor? I asked myself. Was I really ready to sell Josh's shares to his main competitor? Wasn't that too drastic a step? But then I remembered yesterday's humiliation, the apron over my party dress, the surprised looks of the guests, the whispers behind my back, and Josh's cold eyes as he nodded at me as if I were a hired worker, not his mother. No, I wasn't acting impulsively. This decision had been brewing for a long time, but yesterday was the last straw. I took a deep breath, grabbed my bag with my documents, and got out of the car. The elevator took me to the 8th floor, where the Dern Building Materials office was located. Glass doors with the company logo led into a spacious reception area with comfortable leather armchairs and a table with business magazines. A young woman with a neat bun of dark hair sat behind the reception desk. "Good afternoon," I said as I approached the desk. "My name is Eleanor Trist. I have an appointment with Mr. Dern at 3 o'clock. The woman smiled and checked something on her computer. "Yes, Mrs. Trist, Mr. Dern is expecting you. Let me show you to his office." She got up from behind the desk and led me down a corridor with transparent glass walls, behind which I could see the company's employees at work. Everything looked modern and stylish. Minimalist furniture, the latest computer models, lots of light and space. We stopped at the door at the end of the corridor. The secretary knocked, waited for a response, and opened the door, letting me in first. "Mrs. Trist, please come in." Wesley Dern's office was spacious and bright, with a panoramic window overlooking the ocean. The owner of the office rose from his desk to greet me, a tall man of about 59, with neatly trimmed dark hair streaked with gray and attentive brown eyes. "Mrs. Trist, it's very nice to meet you," he said, extending his hand. "Wesley Dern." "Eleanor Trist," I said, shaking his hand. The handshake was firm but not excessive. "Please have a seat," he said, pointing to a chair in front of his desk. "Would you like some coffee or tea?" "Tea, if you don't mind," I replied, sinking into a comfortable leather chair. Dern pressed a button on his phone and asked his secretary to bring tea and coffee. Then he sat down across from me, folding his hands on the table. "I must admit your letter came as a surprise to me," he began. "A pleasant surprise, of course." I looked him straight in the eye. "I assume you know who I am and why I came to you." "Of course," he nodded. "You are the mother of Joshua Trist, my main competitor in the Miramar construction materials market. And as your letter indicates, you own 15% of his company's shares." At that moment, a secretary entered the office carrying a tray with a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and a small plate of cookies. She placed the tray on the table and left silently. I took a sip of tea, gathering my thoughts. Dern's directness threw me off a little. I had expected a more cautious start to the conversation. "Yes, that's right," I confirmed. "And I'm considering selling those shares." "May I ask why?" Dern leaned back in his chair, studying me intently. "As far as I know, your son's company is doing very well." The question caught me off guard. I wasn't prepared to discuss personal motives with a stranger, especially a competitor of Josh's. But there was something about Dorn's manner, direct, businesslike but not aggressive, that encouraged candor. "Let's just say I think it's time to diversify my investments," I replied after a short pause. "And you, as far as I know from conversations with my son, have been interested in his company for a long time." Dern smiled slightly. "Did your son mention me in conversation? Not in the most flattering light, I imagine." "I won't beat around the bush," I smiled faintly in response. "In his mind, you're something of the main antagonist in the story of his business." Dern laughed, sincerely, without malice. "Yes, Joshua is very emotional in business. He takes competition too personally. I'm not like that. For me, it's just part of the game. And for him, it's a matter of life and death," I sighed. "Exactly. And that makes him vulnerable," Dern shrugged. "But let's get back to our potential deal. Are you really willing to sell your shares?" "Yes," I nodded, feeling my pulse quicken. "Provided the price is fair, of course." "Of course," Dern smiled. "Do you have a specific amount in mind?" I took a folder of documents out of my bag. "I have the latest reports on stock prices and dividends here, but I assume you have your own information about the market value of my son's company." "Of course," he nodded. "We follow the market closely. Let me make you an offer." He named a figure that made me raise my eyebrows in surprise. It was about 30% higher than the current market value of my shares. "That's a generous offer," I said cautiously. I would say fair," he smiled. "Perhaps with a small premium for the strategic value of this stake." I understood that he wasn't overpaying for no reason. Buying 15% of a competitor's shares was a serious strategic move. It gave him the opportunity to influence decisions, obtain inside information, and possibly even initiate a merger. "What do you plan to do with these shares?" I asked bluntly. Dern paused for a moment, as if deciding how candid to be with me. "Initially, just hold them," he finally said. "Maybe increase our stake over time by buying shares from other minority shareholders. In the long term," he paused. "Who knows? The construction materials market in Miramar isn't big enough for two large companies to comfortably coexist. A merger could be a logical step." "Josh would never agree to a merger." I shook my head. "He values his independence too much." "Perhaps," Dern agreed. "But business is business. If the offer is attractive enough, the shareholders may pressure him." His words made me think. By selling my shares, I wasn't just leaving Josh's business. I was potentially creating a situation where he could lose control of his company. Was I ready for that? I thought back to yesterday. The apron I had to wear over my party dress. The whispers of the guests behind me. The shame and humiliation I felt serving tables at my own son's wedding. Yes, I was ready. It might be cruel, but Josh had long been due a lesson. A lesson about not taking for granted the people who helped you become who you are. "Let's get back to your offer," I said, straightening up in my chair. "The amount is fine with me. What are the next steps?" Dern seemed a little surprised by my determination, but he quickly recovered. "Excellent. In that case, I'll have my lawyer prepare all the necessary documents. It will take some time. You may want to have your lawyer review them?" "I don't have a personal lawyer." I shook my head. "But I can hire someone for that purpose." "I would recommend that," Dern nodded. "It's always better when both parties are confident in the legal soundness of a transaction." He took a business card holder out of his desk drawer and handed me one. "Here are the contact details of a law firm we often work with. They can recommend a good specialist who will not have any conflict of interest with us." I took the card and put it in my bag. "Thank you. I'll get in touch with them." "Great," Dern smiled. "Then let's arrange the next meeting for when the documents are ready. How about next Wednesday at the same time?" "That works for me," I nodded. "Great." He stood up from the table, signaling that the meeting was over. "It was nice to meet you, Eleanor. May I call you by your first name?" "Of course." I stood up too. "It was nice to meet you too, Wesley." We shook hands and I headed for the door. At the door, I stopped and turned around. "Can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." He looked slightly surprised. "Josh describes you as a ruthless competitor who will do anything to win. Is that true?" Dorn paused for a moment. "I'm a competitor, that's true. And I strive to win, that's also true. But ruthless? No." He shook his head. "I'd say I'm just a realist. Business isn't personal, it's just business. Your son doesn't seem to have fully grasped that yet." I nodded, accepting his answer, and left the office. On the way home, I thought about our meeting. Wesley Dern was not at all what Josh had described him to be. He wasn't a business shark ready to tear his competitors to pieces, but a calm, level-headed man who was simply doing his job. Perhaps Josh was indeed being overly emotional about their rivalry. The next week was spent preparing for the deal. I contacted the law firm Dunn had recommended, and they referred me to a lawyer, Alice Chang, who specialized in corporate law. We met at her office and I explained the situation. "So you want to sell your son's shares in the company to his main competitor?" she clarified, taking notes in her notebook. "Yes, that's right," I nodded. "May I ask why?" She looked up at me. "It could be important for structuring the deal." I hesitated, not wanting to go into the details of my personal relationship with Josh. But I needed good advice, and for that, the lawyer needed the full picture. "Let's just say that my son and I have had some differences," I began cautiously. "I no longer believe that being a shareholder in his company is in my best interest." Alice nodded, not particularly surprised. "I see. In that case, there are a few things we need to pay special attention to. First, your son or the company may have a right of first refusal to purchase your shares. Have you checked the company's articles of incorporation or the shareholders' agreement?" I shook my head. I had copies of those documents, but I had never studied them in detail. "No, I haven't." "Then that will be our first step. she noted in her notebook. If such a right exists, we will first have to offer the shares to your son or the company, and only if they decline can we sell them to a third party. This was unpleasant news. If Josh found out about my intention to sell the shares, he would surely try to buy them himself to prevent them from falling into the hands of a competitor. What if I just sell the shares to Dern without offering them to my son first? I asked. If there is a provision in the Articles of Incorporation or the shareholders' agreement, such a transaction could be challenged in court and declared invalid, Alice replied. Let's review the documents first and determine our options. I gave her all the documents related to my share ownership, and we agreed to meet in 2 days when she had reviewed them. I spent those 2 days in nervous anticipation. What if Josh really did have the right of first refusal? My whole plan to sell my shares to Darn would go down the drain. On the other hand, if he bought my shares, I would still get the money and be able to start a new life independent of him. But then I wouldn't be able to teach him the lesson I wanted to teach him. At our next meeting, Alice brought good news. I've reviewed all the documents, she said. The company's articles of association do indeed contain a right of first refusal, but it only applies to shares acquired in the initial public offering. Your shares were purchased on the secondary market after the company was already established. Therefore, you are entitled to sell them to any buyer without first offering them to existing shareholders. I felt relieved. So we can go ahead with the deal with Dern? Yes, from a legal standpoint, there are no obstacles. Alice nodded. I've reviewed the documents sent by Mr. Dern's lawyer, and they are generally in line with standard practice. There are a few points that I would recommend changing in your favor, but nothing radical. We discussed the details of the deal, and Alice suggested several changes to the contract that would better protect my interests. I agreed with her recommendations, and she sent the relevant proposals to Dern's lawyer. The following Wednesday, I returned to the office of Dern Building Materials. This time I was greeted not only by Wesley, but also by his lawyer, a stern-looking middle-aged man in a perfectly pressed suit. Alice was also present, representing my interests. Eleanor, it's good to see you again. Dern shook my hand. Let me introduce you to Mark Levin, our corporate lawyer. After exchanging pleasantries, we sat down at the conference table. Mark and Alice discussed the latest changes to the contract made at my lawyer's request. To my surprise, Dern agreed to almost all of the proposals without argument. I believe that a good deal is one that benefits both parties, he explained. We get a valuable asset, and you get fair compensation. There's no point in haggling over minor details. When all the details had been agreed upon, it was time to sign the documents. I took the pen Mark handed me and froze for a moment. A thought flashed through my mind. What am I doing? Is this the right decision? The image of Josh's wedding flashed before my eyes again. Me in an apron, serving food to the guests. Josh at the head table, laughing carefree, surrounded by new relatives and business partners. His cold stare as he nodded to me as if I were a hired worker, not his mother. Yes, this was the right decision. Maybe cruel, but necessary. Sometimes people need to face the consequences of their actions to understand how wrong they were. I signed all copies of the agreement. Dern did the same. The lawyers exchanged documents, checked the signatures, and initialed each page. Congratulations, Dern said, shaking my hand. The deal is done. The money will be transferred to your account within 3 business days, as we agreed. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Relief that it was over, anxiety about the future, and to my surprise, some sadness. After all, I had just sold part of the company my son had built over the years to his competitor. It wasn't just a business. It was our family's legacy, a venture that Robert and I had invested not only money, but also a piece of our hearts in. Something wrong? Dern asked, noticing my mood. No, everything's fine, I tried to smile. I'm just realizing that I've just turned an important page in my life. He nodded understandingly. Change always brings mixed feelings, but sometimes it's necessary to move forward. After completing the formalities, Alice left, and Dern suggested we have a glass of champagne to celebrate the deal. I agreed, although I didn't feel particularly festive. We sat in his office looking out at the ocean through the panoramic window. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold. When will Josh find out about the sale of the shares? I asked, taking a small sip of champagne. By law, we have to notify the company of the change in ownership within 10 days, Dern replied. But I plan to do it sooner, maybe tomorrow. There's no point in putting off the inevitable. I nodded. Josh was on his honeymoon and was due back in 10 days. That meant he would find out about my decision as soon as he returned, if not sooner. I wondered how he would react. Would he be angry? Upset? Would he try to contact me? Are you afraid of his reaction? Dern asked, as if reading my mind. No, I'm not afraid, I shook my head. More like preparing for it. He won't be happy, that's for sure. I can imagine. Dern smiled slightly. If you want, I can leave out your role in the deal. I can say I bought the shares through an intermediary. The offer took me by surprise. I thought about it. The temptation to avoid a direct confrontation with Josh was strong. But wasn't that the whole point? To make him understand that his actions had consequences? No, I shook my head. Let him know it was my decision. I'm not ashamed of it, and I'm not afraid of the consequences. Dern nodded respectfully. As you wish. In any case, if you need any support in this matter, you can count on me. Thank you. I finished my champagne and put the glass on the table. But I'll manage on my own. After all, I've managed on my own my whole life. When I left the Mayak Business Center, it was already getting dark. I got into my car but didn't start the engine right away. I needed a few minutes to comprehend what I had just done. I had sold my shares in Josh's company to his main competitor. I had betrayed his trust, albeit in response to his neglect. It was a step that could never be undone or forgotten. Our relationship would never be the same again. But maybe it was for the best. Maybe we both needed this shock to rethink our relationship, to see each other not just as mother and son, but as individuals with feelings, ambitions, and dignity. I didn't know the answers to these questions, but I knew I had made a choice and now had to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. I started the car and drove out of the parking lot. I had a week of waiting ahead of me before Josh would return and find out what I had done. A week to prepare for the storm that was bound to break. But strangely, I felt freer than I had in years. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders, the weight of expectations, unspoken resentments, constant compromises to maintain the appearance of a good relationship. Whatever happened next, I knew I had done what I thought was right. And that was enough. The money from the sale of the shares arrived in my account right on time, 3 business days after signing the contract. The amount was impressive, significantly more than I had ever had in my bank account. Now I was truly financially independent. I could travel, move to another city, or even another country if I wanted to. But instead of euphoria, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. It was as if I had completed an important stage in my life, but I didn't know what would happen next. I realized that selling the shares wasn't just a financial transaction. It was a symbolic end to a certain period of my relationship with Josh. A period when I still hoped that he valued me not only as a mother, but also as a person who supported him in all his endeavors. The week after the deal was closed passed in quiet anticipation. I went about my usual business, shopping, meeting Rose for lunch, calling Brooke. I didn't tell anyone but Rose about the sale of the shares. Even with her, I only shared the news after the deal was finalized. "What have you done?" she exclaimed when I told her over tea in a small cafe near my house. "You sold your shares to Darn, Josh's competitor?" "Yes," I said calmly, sipping my tea. "And I don't regret it." "But why?" Rose looked stunned. "I know you and Josh haven't been on the best of terms lately, but this is too drastic, Eleanor. You didn't see how he treated me at the wedding." I shook my head. "He made me wait tables, Rose. He pushed me away from the main table to make room for some of Audrey's uncles. He introduced me to the guests as if he was ashamed of me." Rose sighed. "I saw some of that, and yes, it was awful. But selling his shares to his competitor is revenge, Eleanor, and revenge never brings the relief you expect." "It's not revenge," I argued. "It's a lesson. Josh took me for granted for too long. Like old furniture that can be shoved into a corner when it gets in the way. It's time to remind him that I'm a person with feelings and dignity." Rose looked at me intently. And now what? Are you ready for his reaction? Ready, I nodded, though inside I was cringing at the thought of the confrontation ahead. He's due back from his honeymoon in 3 days. I assume he already knows about the deal. Dern had to notify the company about the change in ownership. And you're just going to wait for him to come to you? Yes. I took another sip of tea. It's my home. I'm not going to hide or apologize for my actions. Rose shook her head but didn't try to dissuade me any further. She knew me too well. Once I made up my mind, I would stick to it. Josh returned on Tuesday. I found out from a message from Carla, who wrote that he had stopped by to see the girls straight from the airport. That meant he would soon find out about the deal, if he didn't already know. I spent the whole day in nervous anticipation. Every sound from the street made me flinch and listen. Was that his car? Was that his footsteps on the porch? But the day passed and Josh didn't show up. I went to bed thinking that maybe he didn't know about the sale of the shares yet, or maybe he did, but decided to think about the situation before confronting me. The next day, around 11 in the morning, as I was cleaning the living room, there was a sharp ring at the door. I knew it was him before I even opened the door. Only Josh could ring like that, demanding, not asking to be let in. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and opened the door. Josh stood on the porch, pale with anger. His usually neat hair was tousled, as if he had run his hands through it many times, a gesture he made when he was under a lot of stress. His eyes, so similar to Robert's, flashed with rage. "How could you?" he blurted out instead of saying hello. I stepped aside silently, letting him into the house. He entered, almost bursting through the door, and stopped in the middle of the hallway, clenching and unclenching his fists. "You sold your shares to Darn? To my main competitor?" His voice trembled with barely contained anger. "Yes." I calmly closed the door and turned to face him. "I sold my shares to Wesley Dern." "Why?" he almost shouted. "Why did you do that? Do you even realize what you've done?" "Let's go into the living room," I suggested, maintaining my outward calm even though my heart was pounding like crazy. "There's no need to shout in the hallway." He followed me into the living room, still seething with rage. I pointed to the armchair, but he remained standing, pacing the room. "You betrayed me," he said, stopping in front of me. "You betrayed your family. For what? For money." "No, Josh, not for money." I shook my head. "Money has nothing to do with it." "Then why?" He spread his arms wide. "Why did you sell the shares to Dern? You could have sold them to me if you wanted out of the business, or to any other investor. But you chose my worst enemy. Why?" I looked closely at my son. There was more than just anger in his eyes. There was pain, the pain of betrayal. And for a moment I felt a twinge of guilt. But then I remembered the wedding, the apron, the humiliation, and my heart hardened again. "Do you really want to know why?" I asked quietly. "Yes, damn it, I want to know," he almost shouted. "Then sit down," I pointed to the chair, "and listen to me without interrupting." Something in my tone made him obey. He sank into the chair, still tense, ready to jump up at any moment. I sat down opposite him and folded my hands in my lap. "I sold my shares in Dern because you, Josh, stopped seeing me as a person," I began. "To you, I became an inconvenient reminder of your humble origins, something to hide from your new friends and business associates." "That's not true," he shook his head, but not as confidently. "It is," I continued. "And your wedding was the last straw. You pushed me away from the head table to make room for Uncle Audrey. You made me work as a waitress, Josh. At my only son's wedding, I was serving food to guests instead of sitting at the table as the mother of the groom. It was an emergency," he tried to justify himself. "We were short-staffed and you agreed to help." "Agreed?" I smiled bitterly. "Did I have a choice? You presented me with a fait accompli. You didn't even let me change. I worked in my party dress with an apron over it. Do you have any idea how I felt?" He lowered his eyes, unable to respond. "But once upon a time," I continued more quietly, "you were a boy who brought me bouquets of wildflowers, who rushed to defend me when a neighbor's teenager made a rude joke about me, who swore he would always take care of his parents when he got on his feet." "I take care of you," he muttered. "I made sure you'd be financially secure with my company shares. Shares I bought with my own money. I reminded him. With the savings your father and I worked our whole lives to accumulate, and you call that taking care of me? What about respect, Josh? What about basic human kindness? He was silent, and I could see the anger and shame fighting in his eyes. I didn't sell the shares to Darnell to hurt you, I said. I did it so you would finally see me, not as a convenient mother who can be pushed aside when she doesn't fit into your new life, as a person with dignity and feelings. You could have just told me. He looked up at me. Why did you have to do this? I tried to talk to you, Josh. I shook my head. Many times. But you were always too busy, too caught up in your own world to really listen. To you, my feelings were trivial, not worth your attention. He stood up and walked over to the window, turning his back to me. For several minutes, the room was silent. I could see how tense his shoulders were, how he clenched and unclenched his fists, trying to control his emotions. What now? He finally asked, without turning around. You got what you wanted. Dern got a significant stake in my company. He's already started buying shares from other minority shareholders. In 6 months, he could have a controlling stake. It's business, Josh. I used his own phrase, which he often used to explain his tough decisions. Nothing personal. He turned abruptly, and I saw his eyes glistening with tears, a sight I hadn't seen since Robert died. But it is personal, Mom, his voice faltered. It's very personal. My heart sank. Despite all the hurt, he was my son, my boy, and I had hurt him. But sometimes pain is necessary for growth. Yes, Josh, it's personal, I agreed. Just like the way you treated me all these years. Just like making me wait tables at your wedding. That was very personal, too. He sank back into the chair and covered his face with his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. What do I do? Dern could take over the company. Everything I've built over the years could end up in his hands. Fight, I said simply. You've always been a fighter, Josh. Find a way to keep control of the company, or, I paused, or learn to work with Dorn. Maybe he's not the enemy you think he is. Josh looked at me suspiciously. Have you met him? Have you talked to him about me? Yes, I met with him before the deal. I nodded. And he doesn't strike me as the ruthless predator you've made him out to be. He's a businessman, Josh, just like you. He just doesn't take competition personally. You don't know anything about him. Josh shook his head. You don't know what he's done. What did he do? I interrupted him. Steal your clients? Win your bids? This is business, Josh. It's not war. He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. Maybe he was seeing me for the first time not as his mother, but as a separate person with her own views and principles. I don't recognize you, he finally said. Who are you? I'm Eleanor Trist, I replied with dignity. Your mother, yes, but also a woman who has lived 65 years, who has worked, loved, lost, and fought. Who deserves respect not only because she gave birth to you, but because she is a human being. He was silent, and I could see something change in his eyes. Maybe he was beginning to understand. Maybe not, but at least he was listening. What will happen to us now? He asked quietly. To our relationship? I thought about it. It was a difficult question. I had really hurt him, perhaps the most painful thing he had ever experienced. But I didn't want a complete break. Despite everything, he was my son, and I loved him. I don't know, Josh, I replied honestly. It depends on both of us. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or ever for that matter, but I hope you understand why I did it. I need time, he said, standing up. I need to think things through and decide what to do about the company. I understand, I said, standing up too. Take as much time as you need. He headed for the door but stopped in the doorway and turned around. You know what the girls asked about you? Mabel wanted to know why Grandma was a waitress at the wedding. My heart ached at the thought of my granddaughters. What did you tell her? That sometimes adults do strange things, he shrugged. I didn't know what else to say. Tell them that Grandma loves them. I felt a lump rise in my throat. And that I'll always be there if they need me. He nodded and left without saying another word. I heard the front door slam, his car start, and the tires crunch on the gravel driveway. Then there was silence. I went back to the living room and sank into the chair. Talking to Josh had left me emotionally drained. I didn't know what to expect from this meeting, but I certainly didn't expect him to leave like that, lost, broken, but perhaps beginning to understand. I didn't hear from Josh for the next few weeks, but my attention was caught by an article in the local newspaper about a possible merger between Trist Construction Supply and Dern Building Materials. According to the article, representatives from both companies had confirmed that preliminary talks were underway. This surprised me. I didn't expect Josh to even agree to discuss such a possibility. One morning, about a month after our conversation, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw Josh, no longer angry but calm and collected. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Can I come in?" I silently let him in. We went into the living room and sat down in the same chairs we had sat in during our last conversation. "I've been reading about the possible merger," I began, breaking the silence. "Yes," he nodded. "Dern and I are discussing this option. In fact, it may be the best solution for both companies." "I'm glad you were able to look at the situation from a practical point of view," I said cautiously. "After our conversation, I thought a lot," he said, looking away from me. "About the company, about myself, about us, and I realized that you were right. I really stopped seeing you as a person. You were just a mom to me, not an individual with your own desires and feelings." I remained silent, afraid to break the moment. "I'm not proud of how I behaved at the wedding," he continued. "It was unworthy, and I understand why you did what you did." "Josh," I finally found my voice. "I didn't want to hurt you. I just wanted you to see me, really see me." "I see you now." He looked up, and I saw sincerity in his eyes. "And I'm sorry for the wedding, for everything." Those words were like balm for my soul. I hadn't expected to hear them, at least not so soon. "I'm sorry too," I said, "for choosing such a radical way to get through to you." He smiled faintly. "Well, it worked, and maybe it's for the best. Dern wasn't such a bad guy once you got to know him. He had a lot of good ideas for growing the business. I'm glad you gave him a chance," I smiled back. "And one more thing." Josh sat up straight in his chair. "The girls miss you. They've been asking when they'll see Grandma again." "I miss them too," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "Carla and I were thinking, maybe you could watch them on Fridays. Carla has shifts at the hospital and I often have meetings. It would be convenient for all of us." "I'd love to," I said, unable to suppress a smile. "Great," he nodded. "See you Friday then? I'll bring them over after school." "I'll be waiting." I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Josh also stood up and after a moment's hesitation suddenly stepped toward me and hugged me. It was awkward. We hadn't hugged in a long time, but it was sincere. I hugged him back, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "See you Friday, Mom," he said, pulling away. "See you Friday, son," I replied. After he left, I stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the street. Something had changed. Not just between us, but within me. I felt free. It was as if I had shed a heavy burden that I had been carrying for years, a burden of unspoken resentments, suppressed feelings, and constant compromises. In the months that followed, my life took on a new rhythm. On Fridays, I spent time with my granddaughters. We cooked together, played board games, and went to the park. Sometimes Josh joined us, and then we had family dinners. Our relationship slowly repaired itself, not as it had been before, but in a new way, based on mutual respect. I started traveling more. I fulfilled a long-held dream and visited Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. I enrolled in photography classes and discovered that I had a talent for the art. My photos were even displayed at a local exhibition. Josh and Dern's companies merged 6 months later. The new company, Tristern Building Solutions, quickly became the market leader in construction materials in Miramar. Josh and Wesley proved to be excellent partners, complementing each other. Josh's energy and ambition blended perfectly with Dern's experience and strategic thinking. One day, as Josh and I sat on the porch of my house watching the girls play in the garden, he suddenly said, "You know, Mom, I never thought I'd say this, but thank you." "For what?" I asked, surprised. for the lesson you taught me," he said, looking at our daughters playing. "If it weren't for you, I would never have agreed to even talk to Dern, let alone start a business with him. I was too stubborn, too emotional." "It was a risky decision," I admitted. "I could have lost you." "But you didn't," he turned to me. "On the contrary, you helped me become a better person, as a businessman and as a human being." I smiled as I looked at my son, not perfect with his flaws, but growing and changing, and at my beautiful granddaughters who filled my life with joy. And I thought that sometimes you have to risk everything to gain something new and better. It wasn't the end, but a new beginning for all of us.